It's good to be here. I think you all are just a super crew to let me do this. I want to talk to you just for a few minutes tonight about one of my favorite characters in the Bible, and perhaps show something to you that you haven't caught. I'm a great believer in the fact that most of us remember the Bible instead of reading the Bible. And it is possible to remember it while you read it. To go to it recalling what you've always thought and always heard and just sort of do-do-do-do-do, and like water just ripple on over the stones going downstream, and really not touch any of them too seriously. And there's all kinds of insight just hanging out back there in the Bible that most of us never notice. The tragedy of it is we've turned it into sort of an Alice in Wonderland. We don't really believe those people existed, you know. We really don't think they were real. I remember lying in a motel room in Russellville, Kentucky in the spring of 1961 listening to a newscast from Nashville, Tennessee. Honest Injun. Lying there with my head back on the pillow, you know, the newscaster right between my feet down at the foot of the bed giving me the evening news. He's sitting there with that deal in front of him with his notes behind it, looking at you like he's not trying to look at that, you know. And they come on with this, you know, and then this thing's rolling on there. Evening news with so-and-so, and then this guy looks up and says, good evening, you know. Okay, just his opening line, good evening. Gunfire broke out again today on the Sea of Galilee. And I just sat up on the bed. I thought, man, you walk on it, but you don't shoot across it, you know. First time it ever hit me that was a real place. I'm being honest with you, and I was a seminary student. I thought about those as just sort of common old ordinary everyday miracles, you know. We don't see anymore because we're not worthy or something. But they were real people. It hit me next 2 or 3 summers later in the hardest way when I was at Ridgecrest, North Carolina for one of our Southern Baptist student conferences one summer. Somebody from a nearby state university that will remain nameless because he was a little weird, was an art instructor. And he had brought a series of old lithographic reproductions of the old masters' paintings of biblical scenes and church characters. Saints and angels and all that kind of stuff. He had brought 40 of these, had them on easels in the mezzanine lobby, just like out here in this main entrance of the hotel, had them on easels. And people were walking around looking at all these old oil masters, you know, standing there with their hands behind them going, Now, he was sitting nearby on a high stool. His arms were folded across his lap this way, long, skinny neck. He was watching everybody that came through to see whether or not you were humming right or not, you know. His knees were crossed and his feet were level. You ever see anybody like it? It's eerie, man. He's sort of hung there. I've seen vultures on limbs look more alive, you know, and he just sitting there on his stool. My good friend Dan Pratt and I were going through this exhibit of old masters' paintings, and instead of being profoundly carried away with them, we were getting tickled at them. It began to hit us how ridiculous most of the painters of those portraits had gotten in their attitudes about the people in them. They had angels just all doing it. And so Dan and I started going through putting captions on the paintings. And this guy was stiffening up on his stool. About to die, in fact. We had all kinds of, one of them, these 2 guys down in the catacombs with a candle and a big book under their arm, looking leery-eyed at each other. One guy says to the other one, says, would you like to see my bound volumes of Playboy? You know, and little stuff like that going on. Now, we're putting captions, just having fun, acting silly. People started coming through in tour groups of 40, 50, and 60 people for us to, look at this one, rah, you know. And here's this guy on his stool just dying. One of them, there's an angel floating with gossamer and all this kind of stuff, barefooted, sort of at a 45-degree angle, going off the page, you know. 2 fingers kind of spraggled out like that, just fluttering. Dan's caption was, strike 2, you know, just fluttering off the page. So we kept doing this kind of stuff, and the poor guy's passing out. My favorite painting, though, caption's not important at all. My favorite painting was one that about 6 months later snuck up on me in the night. And was exactly what I've been talking about happening to biblical characters. Alice in Wonderland. Cross the Sea of Galilee, shoot, but you don't walk. Now, What happened was when I saw this painting in retrospect several months later, I thought, good heavens, that's what we've done. It's a picture of the manger scene, the birth of Jesus. You've seen it. The same painting, almost identically done in different ways on stamps, Christmas cards, Christmas and store windows for years. Now let us recall that this is a stable, correct? Where animals dwell from time to time. Right? On the floor in this painting is an oriental rug. You gotta trust your sheep, you know. Give his hand on her shoulder, just standing there nearby. And I looked at that and got a little ticked. See, according to Jewish custom, the boys and the girls were betrothed at 14 and 16. And they were betrothed when she became pregnant. And according to Scripture, they were most likely not over 15 and 17 when Jesus was born. We want them to be 27 and 35. You get uptight about young people, remember God gave Jesus to two of them, and He trusted them. And we sit around and praise Mary and play violins and sing Ave Maria and how wonderful she was to be chosen. That's good. I'm not knocking Mary. But you think about Joseph at 16 having to believe that story. Huh? What kind of maturity did that take? And at 17, to stand there, to give the child a name, to raise him, to be his father, his guardian, his guide, until this young man grew shoulder and eyeball high and looked him in the face, walked out into manhood, the most mature human being who ever stepped foot on the face of this earth, the most sensitive man to women in trouble who ever walked, and his favorite name for God is Father. Boy, don't you ever forget Joseph. But we want him to be 35 and a bank vice president and wear a halo and a crown. Capstone, the whole painting is over in the corner. It's the donkey wearing a halo. I tell you what, I bet they're out of halos in Nazareth, you know. Every kinfolk, every neighbor, everybody, all the shepherds got halos. Everybody came in. Oh, here's your halo, George, you know. And I think that's precisely our problem. We go back to the biblical characters and we put halos on our donkeys and oriental tapestries in our mangers, where there were really cobwebs and corn shucks, plain, simple peasant people and two frightened teenagers that hoped, to God's sake, they were doing the right thing. Now that's the kind of strange, befuddling, mystifying, and exciting God that we worship. And I'm glad He didn't just call bank vice presidents and home ec teachers, you see, to be the recipients of His great gifts. Who was it? Simple folks. What was the main criticism of Jesus? He kept time with the harlots and the tax collectors and the sinners and the scallywags and the ruffians and the winos. Those were His friends, and one of the reasons they were critical of Him was because He had fun. He enjoyed Himself. They called Him a wine bibber and a glutton. You don't get that going around saying, "Good morning unto thee, how art thou?"